This is our fifth NJH SSMS webinar. It is on fevers. Now, fevers forever has been uppermost, most concerning thing, especially for young mothers. But today in COVID time, that is uppermost concern of every single person in the entire world, barring no one in this COVID era. So if NJH fever webinar comes as the fifth offering, it is very symbolic because the number 5 means something. Any idea what it means? Actually, it means that your guardian angel or your luck will be with you in this trying time. So it means that NJH, through all its endeavors that Sushma described to you, what all activities we are doing, will definitely ensure that NJH will act as your guardian angel through your travel, through your homeopathic life. This is the value NJH holds for both you and for us, because the whole team of NJH is also growing and also backing you. So with those few words, I want to tell you that we have two great stalwarts from the NJH team. Dr. Asrani, who's going to talk in general, and Dr. Lata. So we are going to have the whole experience of fever. We always talk about holistic. So this is going to be the whole experience of fever for you. So back to you, Sushma, and thank you so much for letting me flag off NJH Webinar 5.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always inspiring to listen to, even if it is for a few minutes. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome from NJH Scintillating Saturdays webinar. I'm Dr. Sushma Jaiswal Meher. I'm going to be hosting this today evening. So let me start the session. And with that, I have to announce the first speaker of the day. And it is actually my honor. I really feel honored that I get to introduce him, because he is someone whom not only in NGH we look up to, but we look up to in life as well. Those who have attended NJH, for them, definitely he doesn't need any introduction. But the ones who have joined now today, or going to hear to him first, I warn them that they are going to be submerged in the ocean of knowledge. He is someone who has completed 43 years of clinical practice. I'm sure most of us have even not celebrated those many birthdays. So that is what, the kind of clinical expertise he has. He's a speaker of national and international stage. He has given over 500 seminars. That's quite a feat. And he is also awarded as the Legend of Medicine, recognized by Times of India. He was awarded in 2018 by Times Healthcare, and he has also been a health consultant in World Bank. So with that, let me allow Sir to speak. Sir, on behalf of NJH, I invite you for yet another mesmerizing session. Over to you, sir.
You should tell his name also. So far, you've not mentioned it. Secret.
Calling your name is like, calling your guru name, so you kind of hell your ears. Dr. C.H. Asrani, NJH team, and the entire family who is here. Sir.
Thank you, Sushma.
Sir.
Believe me, such an introduction is the reason that even today I get butterflies in my stomach before I am starting a session, because I have to keep a very big image and continue to talk well. So let me begin without wasting much time. 40 minutes. Approach to fevers in the COVID time. The fifth webinar of NJH. Fever. Doctor, I have fever. Doctor, my child has fever. And then we start thinking, we start advising medicine. Our job is to first find out, is it truly fever? Do not go by subjective information, look at objective information, or is it just feverish feeling? Many times you will be surprised that more than 50% of the time it is fever. बुखार जैसा लगता है, तापा सारखं वाटतंय, એવું લાગે છે કે તાવ આવશે. I'll say it is coming, but it never comes. Is it truly measured on thermometer or reported just by touch on forehead and cheek? And I tell my patients, if you touch your child or mother or wife or husband, then the fever that you are feeling has 50% component of love because you are concerned. And then one person tells others, "Arey, aap bhi haath laga ke dekh lo." Other person may not feel anything, but why should he bother? He says, yes, yes. And then after 5 people touching, they are transmitting their body heat. If measured, how often it is measured? Is it measured only when there is fever, or is it measured otherwise also? Is there a charting? And this charting, which we started in a clinic almost 5 years ago, now has come to be big help in our COVID times when we are working remotely. And then, is apyrexia the target? Do I need 98.4 or I am okay with 99.4? I'm okay with 99.4 because pyrogens, the fever inflammatory products, actually benefit by killing the germs. So do not always be in a rush to bring down the fever. See, this is the charting in COVID time, oxygen and temperature. And then those who are tech savvy, we give them a template, it comes on WhatsApp. You need something like this if you want to evaluate your patient well enough and do justice to them. For whatever kind of fever you treat, there is supportive therapy always the same. Hydration. People must consume at least 2.5 liters of water, and in hidden water about 3.5 liters for a moderate fever. If it is high fever, severe 103.4, the water intake should go up. I'm not even saying water loss occurring due to vomiting diarrhea. Even without vomiting diarrhea, there is dehydration happening in fever. Soft, easily digestible, nutritious diet. The nutritious word is very important. Just giving kanji does not give any nutrition. And replenishing both tangible and intangible loss. Tangible loss is vomiting and diarrhea. Intangible loss is due to fever, due to respiration. Let's see what are the acute infections. In these acute infections, before you actually diagnose what infection you are treating with, look for comorbidities. Is your patient a diabetic, a HIV positive, hypertensive, known case of chronic bronchitis, COPD, ILD, pregnant, more so if you're dealing with a UTI, has an autoimmune disorder, or is the patient on long-term steroid? If you do not watch this patient very closely, because this is the patient that can actually bring down your reputation if you're not careful. So let's look at acute febrile illnesses. We can divide into two: with focal sign and symptoms, acute upper respiratory tract infection, acute lower respiratory tract infection, acute urinary tract infection, GI infection with vomiting diarrhea, or a skin infection, boil, abscess, Whitlow cellulitis. As the name suggests, you have focal sign and symptoms. These are easy to diagnose with. The others, where there are no focal sign and symptoms, only fever, headache, body ache, lack of appetite, things like COVID, malaria, dengue, enteric fever, chikungunya, leptospirosis, swine flu. This is where you have to start thinking what may be the thing. Or is it just fever? As we go ahead, we'll see fever, almost 70 to 80% fevers are self-limiting. Do not think that patient coming to you and you giving some medicine, patient got cured, and then publish studies that with 1 dose of my medicine, patient became all right. It is just fever. for no reason. It's a self-limiting, most likely a viral fever. So this is again just fever, no diagnosis. Many times this fever will become all right on its own. And rarely you may have to admit a patient, investigate, call it PUO, and the patient gets all right. We don't know how. Then you must say why we should worry. We have been treating fever all our life. What is there to worry? Acute infections lead to prolonged morbidity and mortality by a lot of changes in the body if we are not careful to monitor them. Dehydration, plus minus electrolyte imbalance. Electrolyte imbalance more if the patient is a hypertensive, diabetic, or a kidney disease, or is on some medication for hypertension. Hypoxia. COVID has at least, they said 2020 is a wasted year. I would say at least it has taught a doctor the value of hypoxia and oxygen saturation. Metabolic acidosis, little tricky to manage, but then you can always suspect in cases of acute asthma in fever. And low WBC count and low platelet count. These things, if you do not monitor, the patients will either get severe morbidity. A fever which should have become all right in 3 days may take 10 days. And acute infection in chronic setting, as we showed, a patient of COPD getting pneumonia or getting acute LRTI can go into sepsis very easily. A diabetic, even well-controlled diabetic getting UTI can go into sepsis very easily. A chronic liver disease patient, a cirrhosis patient getting a boil, a simple furuncle, can die because of sepsis. And all this can happen if we are not careful. So as a homeopath or as an allopath, the primary care practitioner has to do 3D thinking. First is my clinical diagnosis. What should I treat with? Second is my remedy selection. And when I'm thinking on these two dimensions, the third dimension is my patient going to die overnight or is my patient going to get better? What is the high risk profile of this patient that I should be more concerned about? So let's begin with influenza. As I said, just fever, self-limiting, this is the commonest. Short incubation period, 1 to 2 days with abrupt onset. Many times you will have patients in the family, other people having it. Mild upper respiratory tract infections are common, non-productive cough, pharyngitis, coryza, largely self-limiting. So you just give supportive treatment, hydration, good diet, and maybe rest for a day or two, they become all right. Then we have acute respiratory infection, which we know in our day-to-day practice, almost 60 to 70% cases are acute respiratory infection. You have fever, malaise, body ache, coryza, sore throat. Now, just this much today is going to make us start palpitation because it could be COVID. Change in voice, hoarseness if the patient has laryngitis. Anosmia, loss of smell. Loss of smell is not specific to COVID. If you have a chronic sinusitis or if you have polyposis, then you can still get loss of smell. In this last 3 months, I have treated several patients loss of smell which were not COVID. Productive cough or dry irritating cough based on the patient's profile. Examine upper respiratory tract, oral cavity and chest. Even though 60 to 70% of our cases are acute respiratory infection, each one of them deserve respect. Otherwise, you may miss out on a pneumonia, which has high fever, chills, pleuritic chest pain, rusty sputum, and X-ray chest. You may miss out COVID and you may miss out H1N1, although rare nowadays. And anything that you miss out and you come to know later that your patient was admitted, was very serious and died, and you wonder, oh God, I never even knew. There was nothing that I could pick up. but then you have to have a high index of suspicion. Coming to pneumonia, a potentially serious condition, but very easily treatable. Short incubation period, abrupt onset. Anything with a short incubation period has very abrupt onset. Mild upper respiratory tract infections are common, symptoms are common. Non-productive cough, pharyngitis, coryza, superadded by hemoptysis or rusty sputum, shortness of breath, and pleuritic chest pain. Because in the pathology, the part of the lung which is filled with air gets consolidated, it gets stuck to the pleura, and then on breathing, deep inspiration, that part pains wherever the consolidation is. Respiratory examination may reveal focal coarse crackles or signs of consolidation. To elicit this, number one, you should be examining every patient, not only taking rubrics. Number two, you should be examining patients, at least male patients, with their shirts open, because your stethoscope should not be touching this thing. Female patient may examine females disrobed, and then you have to start percussing. That means you need the chest bare to do percussion or even to do vocal resonance. Then go and search Google today that for a proper auscultation of the chest, you have 3 to 4 areas in front on both sides and 3 to 4 areas behind. Most of us, we are guilty that when we put a stethoscope, we are not actually paying attention to the breath sounds. Hypoxia is common. Why is hypoxia common? Because lungs are exchanging gases. So if say 1/4 of the lung, half of one lung, so 1/4 of both lungs is consolidation gone, and it is not doing gaseous exchange, there is bound to be hypoxia. There will be neutrophilic leukocytosis. Chest X-ray may demonstrate infiltrates or consolidation. Percentage of lung affected helps you decide IP at care, inpatient care. If, like, in a child, you see one lung is fully consolidated, yes, please admit, because this child can die. In adult, if you see bilateral, please admit. Repeat chest X-ray is a must to demonstrate cure. Just by patient getting better in fever and cough is not a sign, because many a times a patch of pneumonia may be blocking a tuberculosis or a chronic tuberculosis or acute tuberculosis underneath that. Or you should always have a plain X-ray comparing with the old X-ray, and the radiology is reporting that this X-ray is normal and there is total clearance of the consolidation seen. This is the reason that you must demonstrate cure by second X-ray. And if second X-ray is still showing something, a third X-ray after 10 days. Coming to malaria, you may say malaria is not so common, but malaria may be not so common, may be easily treatable, and homeopathy to began with treatment of malaria. Malaria can give complications. Today, or last 10 years at least, we are seeing even Vivax malaria is killing patients. It is caused by infection with Plasmodium species transmitted by infected female Anopheles mosquito. It is the nighttime mosquito. We have two types of malaria in India, Vivax and falciparum. Complications occur due to untreated or inadequately treated disease. How do you say inadequately? Because for disease stage at which you pick up, you have different lines of treatment. Low platelets, extension of malaria to cerebral and or renal extension. How do you diagnose malaria? Clinical diagnosis: moderate to severe shaking chills, high fever, profuse sweating, headache, muscle pain, nausea and vomiting, splenomegaly, plus minus hepatomegaly. Now, why I'm spending a slide on clinical diagnosis? Because even Government of India says, if you suspect malaria, you may collect the sample and send, but start treatment empirically, because any delay in starting malaria treatment can prove fatal. So do not say let the report come. What is severe malaria? High fever plus at least one of the following: prostration, inability to sit, altered sensorium, patient drowsy. When you are treating with acute fever, weakness is a word that should never enter your mind. A lot of doctors have lost patients because the patient was drowsy and they just thought, oh, he's weak. He's not eaten anything. Altered sensorium in any fever, in any patient, fever or otherwise, requires immediate referral. Unusual lethargy or patient of coma. Breathing difficulty. We know malaria is not a respiratory condition. So if patients start feeling breathing problems, then it is serious. I have had, at least in my practice, 5 patients who developed ARDS with Vivax malaria. Severe anemia, generalized convulsion or fits, inability to take orally. People vomit, but then not even a drop going in, non-stop vomiting. Dark urine, black water fever, or reduced urine output. One of this and high fever not responding to treatment is severe malaria. How are the laboratory tests done? The best test even today is a peripheral smear and not the rapid detection kits, because peripheral smear tells you which species it is. It tells you which stage the infection is. So this remains gold standard even today. Those of you who are keeping kits, I have a kit in my clinic that is just to confirm and start treatment, but I always wait for the smear report to come in. Finger prick is preferable because from venous blood, it does not come out easily. Rapid detection test detect malaria antigen in the whole blood. They can effectively and rapidly diagnose P. vivax malaria. So today we are saying, even the government is saying that, okay, in tribal areas, you may not do smear, but otherwise smear is still the gold standard. When do you admit the patient? Parasitemia 2%. Now see, parasitemia you can only get on smear, you cannot get on rapid detection test. Parasitemia 2%. Now we know that the malarial parasites are living inside RBCs, and every time the large number of RBCs break down because of, and they release malarial parasite, that is the time the patient gets a strong chill. So if you ask the pathologist, if the parasitemia is more than 2%, that becomes critical. I have had cases where, poor patients, even if you send to municipal hospital where people don't admit, if you write parasitemia 2.5, they admit without a reason. Parasitemia above 5% could be fatal. Complicated malaria, cerebral malaria, where patient has had convulsion, more common with falciparum. Acute renal failure, again more common with falciparum. Hypoxia, I have seen in both Vivax and falciparum. Poor general condition, patient toxic, dehydrated, or non-stop vomiting, we must admit. And then thrombocytopenia, platelets below 50,000 per cubic millimeter, even if clinical condition is stable. Patient saying, nahi, I am better, humko acha lag raha hai kal se. But if the platelets are below 50, you better admit, otherwise you will be in trouble later. Dengue is again mosquito transmitted thing by Aedes aegypti. It is a self-limiting disease. It is a daytime mosquito. Abrupt onset of symptoms. Before I go further, let me tell you that dengue you will see more commonly spreading in offices, because the mosquito is daytime. Offices have air-conditioned offices, glass windows. A mosquito enters, the mosquito cannot leave. And then if one gets dengue, then other people keep getting dengue. Headache, retrobulbar pain that worsens with eye movement is very typical. A rash may be present in about half of the patients, which could be either petechial or otherwise hemorrhagic. This is how the rash appears. The rash generally appears when the fever is waning. then leukopenia and thrombocytopenia. WBCs are down, platelets are down. Investigation, we have 3 investigations: NS1 antigen, IgM, IgG. When asking for serological test, one must ask for both IgG and IgM. Dengue NS1 positive up to day 4 and 5, that's an antigen. Dengue IgM from 5th day onwards. Getting IgG positive in a supposedly first episode of fever indicates that this is in effect a second episode, and second episode of dengue has a higher chance of complication like dengue shock syndrome or dengue hemorrhagic fever, and that require ICU stay and a higher chance of mortality. So if you are treating a dengue patient, even if the dengue patient has IgG negative first time, you have to tell the patient when the treatment is over, in next 2 to 4 weeks, even if you get a fever of 99.5, do not think I have just recovered from dengue. Come back immediately. This could be the second attack, and that is more worrisome. So IgM positive or negative, if we are done very early, 3rd day of fever, IgM may be negative, IgG also negative, primary infection. IgM positive, IgG positive, it is secondary infection. NS1 is an antigen, it's not an antibody. Management of dengue actually is very simple. Dengue has no treatment. Mainstay of management is hydration. If patient is admitted, the patient is admitted for IV fluids only, because dengue causes lot of capillary leak, and that causes severe dehydration, hemoconcentration. So you will see if a patient, you have done 2 CBCs, hemoglobin is rising and packed cell volume or hematocrit is rising, that is critical. That is a red alert for you. Watch for complication, thrombocytopenia or any bleeding anywhere. Even if a female has the menstrual period going on, but she says that, doc, it is much more, almost double of my usual flow, take it seriously. Don't think it is just menstrual flow. Dengue shock syndrome, if the patient's pulse becomes thready and weak, or BP becomes lower despite patient taking a lot of water, then patient may be going in for dengue shock syndrome. And dengue hepatitis, though not common, but dengue affects liver, non-stop vomiting and some amount of SGOT, SGPT going up, then look for it. Coming to enteric fever. Enteric fever, we know, is a fecal-oral transmission. It is a disease of poor hygiene. All our vada pavs, pani puris, that is the cause of enteric fever. Incubation period is 1 to 3 weeks. So when you ask history, when the patient comes with high fever, which is not responding to treatment and has GI symptoms, maybe nothing specific, just uneasiness, ask, have you eaten anything outside in last 3 to 4 weeks time? People will generally tell you of last few days, they will never tell you of 3 weeks. Gradual onset of sustained fever starts low, 100, 99.5, 100.5, and gradually start becoming 102, 103, 104. Rarely normalizes. Here your chart comes handy. Whatever paracetamol or whatever medicine the patient takes, temperature does not come normal. It reduces but does not become normal. Rigors are uncommon. Abdominal pain and headache is common. Humid abdomen, when you feel the abdomen, you feel like a doughy feeling. When you have doughy floor and how you feel it, the abdomen feels like that. And coated tongue. I have a patient with me, suppose any patient comes with 3 days fever, I tell them stop cleaning your tongue in the morning after brushing. I want to see coated tongue. Relative bradycardia in adults. We all know that our pulse rate goes high with fever. But here, if the pulse rate is 104, fever is 104, pulse rate will be 95. May have a blanching erythematous maculopapular rash called rose spots. This is how it appears. Diagnosis is by culture. The most preferred way is culture. The isolation of Salmonella typhi or S. paratyphi in blood, stool or urine culture, because only the culture will tell you patient has typhi or paratyphi. Vidal test, if you are doing, nowadays it is better not to do Vidal test, because you will never know whether this Vidal positive is for today's fever or patient has been having a positive Vidal for a long time. And if you're doing also, ask for tube Vidal, not slide Vidal. The lab tells us, sir, slide Vidal मैं आपको 2 घंटे में report देता हूँ. Say, I don't want that. Let me wait for 24 hours, but give me tube Vidal. And if he doesn't have, then do culture. Typhi IgM again can pick up only typhoid, will not pick up paratyphoid. And you will have a false sense of security that typhoid is not there. But paratyphoid has the same line of treatment, same risk factor, same complication. Leptospirosis, not very common. Essentially, it's a bacterial infection by Leptospira and transmitted to man by infection of rat urine. So the commonest is history of wading in water, dirty water, because the monsoon water goes into the rat holes, the urine gets contaminated, it comes out, and if you are walking, we all have micro cuts on our soles, and then leptospirosis begins. Conjunctival congestion. Symptoms and signs of meningitis may be present. If it is severe, leptospirosis can kill through meningitis and through respiratory failure. Detection of specific IgM response by the end of first week of the illness. Whale disease is actually severe leptospirosis, where there is a complication of hepatosplenomegaly, jaundice, bleeding diathesis, renal failure. So all this makes leptospirosis with any of these called as Wales disease. Any pyogenic infection, focal symptoms and signs depend on the site affected. Boil or furuncle. Boil and furuncle is same. Furuncle has more weight in the name. Boil is ordinary boil. People don't take boil seriously. Carbuncle, abscess or a Whitlow. This is a Whitlow, this is a furuncle, and this is a carbuncle. Always with multiple openings, and the reason is a furuncle is in one hair follicle, whereas carbuncle has multiple hair follicles. Now, all these things, then you don't have to think, you know the cause of fever. May also have prominent systemic symptoms with group A streptococcal infection or pyelonephritis. Now, all these infections are generally group A streptococci, and group A streptococci affect the kidneys. You can have pyelonephritis also. You will have neutrophilia, high WBC count, maybe as high as 20,000, and markedly elevated CRP because you've seen the inflammation around. Investigations depend on the site affected and the severity of symptom that the patient has. Chikungunya, same mosquito that was giving dengue also gives chikungunya. Severe pain, back and joints. Although it has fever, it has body ache, but the pains are more in back or in joints. Treatment is entirely symptomatic, no specific treatment. So this mosquito gives disease which has only symptom and you have to monitor. Dengue also has no specific treatment. Chikungunya has no specific treatment. There is no specific antiviral drug against chikungunya virus. When do you hospitalize? In very rare cases, the platelets may go down. Extremes of age, persons above 60 and infants below 1 year of age, chikungunya will admit because they are more likely to go into complications and may die. Pregnant patient with chikungunya should be admitted. Fever persisting for more than 5 days, high fever above 103 and 4. Incessant vomiting, intractable pain, so much pain that patient cannot walk a step also. Then Admission is only for symptomatic relief, nothing else. You have to monitor platelets. So understand, every fever you have to monitor platelets, because platelets can go down in a severe viral fever, in malaria, in dengue, and in chikungunya. UTI, something where we need to have lot of attention, all our focus. I am sure everybody who's in practice has had patients who walk into the clinic and say, "Doc, I have urinary infection, give me some medicine." That is not to be taken as that. High fever up to 103 degree Fahrenheit. And UTI fever has chills. So fever with chills, your first two diagnoses in the mind should be malaria or UTI. All urinary symptoms are not UTI, especially in a female, because the urine, when being passed, is touching vulva, the skin, it picks up any of the infection, any small cuts, micro cuts, and those burning. There could be dysuria. So just the symptom of burning micturition does not mean the patient has UTI. I am sorry to all the ladies who are present here, but I have seen that any of the female magazines publishes the article on UTI, and you have hordes of female patients walking to the doctor with the magazine in hand. "Doc, I am sure I have UTI." All reports of pus cell in urine is not UTI. So suppose I have a patient who has fever, or who doesn't have fever, just comes to me with burning micturition, and I do a urine test. I see 60 pus cells in per high power field. I ask the patient, "Fever?" "No fever." I evaluate the patient. Is my patient low immunity? Is elderly patient? Diabetic? No. Then I say, "Oh, sorry, then this is not a UTI, because this much pus cell should give you high fever." So then I tell her to collect a sterile sample of urine, and I get 0 or 3 pus cells. So evaluate properly sterile sample. What is sterile sample is? For a male, they have to retract the prepuce, wash the glands, and pass urine directly into the container without it touching anywhere, midstream sample. It becomes difficult for females. It should not touch the surrounding skin. So they have to take care, wash the private part with a hand pump before, and then make sure the urine is not touching the skin around, and midstream sample directly into the container. Please try to explain. Learn to explain this. Otherwise, you will be treating UTI and patient will keep coming and telling you, "Doc, I've been taking treatment for 1 month. My pus cells are just not going down." Because all you are treating is a contaminated sample. Treatment till 3 reports post-treatment are normal. If you're treating correctly, you have picked up a true UTI. Okay, I've done a culture now, and it is positive. I have colony count above 1 lakh. Remember, colony count in urine culture in a non-diabetic up to 1 lakh is not significant. In a diabetic, even 10,000 is significant. You have to keep treating UTI patient till 3 reports post-treatment are normal. Otherwise, incompletely treated UTI can lead to pyelonephritis and renal scarring or going ahead medical renal disease. UTI versus vaginitis versus poor intimate hygiene, you have to evaluate your patient. Many times, like, we feel that, okay, we blame ladies for poor hygiene, but I'm telling you, I had patients who, when I examined the glands, I could see so much of smegma, and the man says that he never washes while taking bath. So poor intimate hygiene is in both genders. Recurrent UTI, you have a UTI, you're treated, after 1 month again UTI, evaluate for obstructive calculi. If there's a stone in the kidney or the ureter and it is causing hydroureter hydronephrosis, this patient is likely to get recurrent UTI, uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, or vaginitis. UTI could be a fatal condition, and I showed you initially comorbidity. UTI with diabetes is danger. When we say UTI 1, diabetes 1, 1 plus 1 is not 2, this becomes 1 plus 1 is 11. And most common bacteria for UTI is E. coli. E. coli is a gram-negative bacteria. These patients can go into gram-negative septicemia very easily. If I am scaring you, okay, that is my aim, because never take UTI lightly. Then meningitis, encephalitis. I added this slide because it's not common, because I want to inculcate a habit in every doctor. Once the lockdown opens, every patient has to be examined. Okay, other than a red eye or a boil, every patient has to be made to lie down, especially a child, because a triad of fever, headache, vomiting is meningitis unless proved otherwise. Absolutely listless child. You have a child who's generally crying. Now the mother has put the child on an examination couch. Child is just looking at you, not saying anything, very listless, suspect meningitis. If there is altered sensorium, then it is more likely to be encephalitis. Why I'm saying you should make the child lie down, because, you know, develop a habit that each time, like every time a child patient of mine, when I'm examining, even if I'm auscultating, no, child has cough, child has diarrhea, it's now a habit that even if I'm woken up deep sleep, I will check the neck stiffness and kerning. It takes less than 2 seconds, but you can save a child. And I can today say, like, okay, you may say I am boasting, but I have picked up meningitis in cases where the pediatrician initially said it's not there, but on second day they did CSF and it was positive. That you will need practice, and you need to do in everything, every case. Neck stiffness, learn how to do it. Kernick sign, see this. With patient lying flat in bed with knee flexed 90 degree, the leg cannot be completely extended. So at least those of you who are examining patients sitting in chair, from tomorrow at least make every patient lie down and then examine. It will give dividends, and any one case if you pick up in your lifetime, no, then the publicity that you will get will be amazing. I once had a child, like I had this habit from my day one of practice. I will never examine sitting unless the patient says that, oh, I cannot get up on the couch. In my clinic today, I have one couch which is of average height for my comfort. Second couch is the chair height, so that a patient who cannot climb up, but I will not examine patient who's sitting. One child I was examining, 10-year-old, and I told the child to get up, and mother came forward to help the child get up. I said, why, what happened? No, he is feeling weak. He cannot get up. And then we examined. We had not done neurological examination. He had a follicular tonsillitis. And then we realized that this child has got a neurological problem. We admitted him. Lab investigations in a patient with no localizing sign. First is always patient comes to you 2 days of fever, 102, no signs, CBC, routine urine, and CBC, if you are in a good place, from a cell counter, not manual. This is the first test to be done, and do not hesitate to repeat again. Second test, battery of test is smear for MP, falciparum vivax, with a request to do parasitemia percentage. Dengue NS1, IgM, IgG, and IgM lepto is the second. Third is bacterial culture, blood urine, if you need to do, if the condition of the patient warrants that. And fourth group is SGPT. Remember I told you patients who are having chronic ailments, SGPT is the most sensitive test for liver dysfunction. Don't waste patients' money into liver function test, just do SGPT. Use investigations rationally. Serum creatinine, again, most sensitive test for renal dysfunction. I don't even need BUN. and serum electrolyte, especially if clinically indicated, patient of hypertension or diabetes. Lastly, few slides on COVID because that is the trend nowadays. It's an acute viral infection since December 2019, highly transmissible. We have seen daily new guidelines are coming up because nobody knows anything. No definitive treatment. What started initially as working, suddenly then say not working. End of the day, if the patient is dying, everything is tried. There's a lot of panic, there's a lot of infrastructure not available. Everybody is making tall claims. And normally a research in modern medicine takes years and decades. Now, because there is emergency, there's panic, they're doing short research. I'll tell you how to keep your clinic safe. How do you diagnose? It's a nasopharyngeal swab properly collected. So we do not do that. Let the proper ICMR accredited lab only do. The swab will be used to do either an antigen. The report comes in 2 hours. If antigen is positive, there is COVID infection. You need not do the RT-PCR test. You can start treating on basis of antigen positive only. If you want to confirm, then you can do RT-PCR. Some people do RT-PCR directly because antigen test in Bombay at least is not available for common people. Again, RT-PCR, swab properly collected. Actually, the test takes 6 to 8, but now because there is a lot of red tapeism, every report has to go to municipality or the local authority. It takes time of 24 hours. And antibody test for people who have kind of been in contact or who have recovered, then they need to do antibody to say whether they have a IgG antibody, which is a long-term protection for COVID. Clinically, asymptomatic people, pre-symptomatic 1 to 3 days prior to symptom onset, and symptomatic persons. Let's see what are they. Mild, usually no need for inpatient care. So believe me, there are 2 parameters which will decide whether your patient stays home or is admitted. One is SpO2. If SpO2 is below 94, you have to consider admission. Or if respiratory rate is more than 24, you consider admission. Or HRCT shows CORAD 4 or 5, you consider admission. More so if the patient is a diabetic, hypertensive or pregnant. Moderate symptoms require admission for care and typically presents as pneumonia, viral pneumonia, but again may not be very bad. Severe COVID requires intensive care and typically includes respiratory failure, may require BiPAP or ventilator. Universal precaution for us: when you go back to your clinic, there should be a signage that you are not allowing relatives, you're not allowing a crowd, you will allow people only with a mask. I started from today, what I did was, people come with a mask. I don't know when the mask is washed, from where they have come. So in my clinic, a disposable mask is given to each person. It is costing us in bulk just ₹2.50. I'm sure we can recover that in the... There should be signage, okay, sanitizer here, wash your hand, this, that, everything. Only by appointment, no walk-in patients. Avoid fever patients in clinic or fixed slot toward the end of the practice, because after that the clinic gets disinfected. Social distancing. Washable mask, face shield for us. N95 or face shield. PPE for doctor or any clinical assistant if you are likely to see more of fever cases. Change of glove for every patient. Again, that 4-5 rupee is worth it. Those who don't want to do, then they should sanitize the glove after every patient. Sanitizer availability, disinfection of the clinic.